This man proved that you don't perceive time, you invent it. Your mind manufactures the sensation of now in real time, according to Feynman. It manufactures the memory of the past. It shapes expectations of the future. And you believe you're being carried by an invisible current from birth to death. You're not. That current doesn't exist. What they taught you, that time passes and you're its victim, is the greatest illusion of your existence. Physics demonstrates past, present, and future coexist. The Upanishads taught this 3,000 years ago. Meditators experience it directly. You're not inside time. You are the consciousness projecting the illusion of sequence onto a frozen eternity. And as long as you believe you're being pushed from cradle to grave, you'll never realize that the time prison exists only in your head.
Richard Feynman discovered something disturbing about the human mind while trying to understand how we perceive time. He started by timing himself, counting mentally to 60 and checking how many actual seconds had passed. Consistently, he'd reach 60 when the clock showed 48 seconds. Intrigued, he tested variations. He climbed and descended stairs while counting. He lay in bed with his heartbeat slowed down. The result never changed. His internal counting rhythm stayed stable, regardless of what his body was doing. Then came the real discovery. Feynman realized he could read while counting. Words entered through his eyes, meaning formed in his mind, and the counting continued intact in parallel. But when he tried to speak, the counting vanished instantly. He mentioned this to John Tukey, a brilliant mathematician working at Princeton. Tukey thought it was absurd. For him, it was exactly the opposite. He could speak easily while counting, but reading was impossible. Two scientists, two opposite experiences, both verifiable. The explanation revealed something nobody expected. When Feynman counted, he heard the numbers in his own head, an internal voice pronouncing 1, 2, 3. Since that voice occupied the same channel as speech, trying to talk interrupted the counting. But his eyes used a different channel. That's why reading didn't interfere. Tukey worked differently. When he counted, he saw a kind of tape with numbers scrolling by. A visual image, not a sound. That's why he could talk. Speech didn't compete with the image. But reading required his eyes, the same channel his number tape occupied. The mind operates through separate channels, and different people use different channels for the same task. Stop and consider what this means. Right now, as you process these words, your mind is running multiple simultaneous programs. One monitors sounds around you, another maintains the sensation of where your body is in space. Another extracts meaning from the text. Another project that you'll do in 5 minutes from now. None of these programs was consciously activated. They just run, in parallel, all the time. And each one processes time differently. The program that identifies sounds operates in milliseconds. It needs to distinguish phonemes that last fractions of a second. The one who plans the future works with hours, days, and weeks. The one that accesses memories can cross decades in an instant and return to the present without transition. These programs aren't synchronized with each other. They're just functioning together, creating the sensation that you're a single person living a continuous experience. That sensation is constructed, manufactured, in real time, by the interaction of these channels. Meditation masters across various traditions report something consistent. In deep states of practice, time stops passing, not as a figure of speech, as direct experience. Hours feel like minutes, or minutes feel like hours. The distinction between before and after simply dissolves. The practitioner emerges from the session unable to estimate how much time has passed. For decades, this was dismissed as mystical language, religious exaggeration, subjective distortion without relevance. But Feynman's discovery suggests another interpretation. If the mind processes time through separate channels, verbal, visual, sensory, projective, then temporal experience, doesn't come from outside. It's assembled internally, by the architecture of consciousness itself. The time you feel passing doesn't correspond to any external river carrying you along. It corresponds to the fragmented functioning of your mind. What exists out there is a structure where events are organized. What you feel, that sensation of passage, of flow, of being pushed from past to future, is manufactured by mental programs operating in parallel channels, each with its own temporal relationship. Here's the crucial point. When advanced meditation practitioners enter deep states, these channels begin to unify. The fragmentation decreases. What normally operates separately, visual attention, verbal processing, bodily sensation, and temporal projection, starts functioning as an integrated system. A single flow of consciousness instead of multiple parallel programs. And when that happens, the illusion of temporal passage dissolves. Not because they transcended physical reality, not because they accessed higher dimensions, but because they stopped actively constructing the illusion. The sensation of time passing requires fragmentation. It requires one part of the mind observing another part change. When everything unifies, there's no longer an internal reference to manufacture the passage. Feynman mapped the channels without, knowing he was touching something that ancient traditions had already discovered through a different path. They developed practices to unify these channels. Breathing techniques, concentration, mantra repetition, each one interfering with a specific channel until they all synchronize. The conclusion is inevitable. Time, as you experience it, is a product of a fragmented mental architecture. Change the architecture, change the experience, not as a theory, as an observable fact. This raises a question that shouldn't let you sleep peacefully. If the passage of time is a construction of the mind, what exactly is passing? And if you can alter that construction, what else about reality are you manufacturing without realizing it? The Upanishads, sacred texts of the Vedic tradition compiled over 3,000 years ago, teach something that defies our everyday experience. Brahman, ultimate reality, exists outside of time. It's not that Brahman is eternal in the sense of lasting forever. It's more radical than that. Brahman simply doesn't participate in time. Past, present, and future are illusions of the limited mind. Fundamental reality is an absolute simultaneity where everything already exists. This might sound like abstract mysticism, but it's not. Yogis in deep meditative states report a consistent experience. When the mind quiets completely, the sensation of time disappears. It's not that time seems to pass slowly. It's that the very category of time loses meaning. Masters from different traditions, from Zen to Sufism, from Tantra to contemplative Christianity, describe the same phenomenon. An instant becomes eternity. Eternity fits in an instant. The distinction between before and after dissolves completely. Think about this for a moment. Tradition separated by thousands of miles and centuries of history arrived at the same conclusion through direct experience. Not through theory, not through philosophical speculation, through something that happens when consciousness frees itself from its habitual limitations and touches a more fundamental reality. And here's where something disturbing enters. In 1908, mathematician Hermann Minkowski presented a reformulation of Einstein's equations that changed our understanding of the universe. He demonstrated that space and time aren't separate entities, but dimensions of a single structure, space-time. In this structure, the past hasn't disappeared. The future isn't yet to come. Everything exists simultaneously at different coordinates. Physicists call this the block universe. The implication is radical. The flow of time you feel right now is an illusion of perspective. The universe doesn't happen. The universe simply is, a complete and unchanging structure where every moment coexists with all others. Picture a film reel. Each frame exists. The frame at the beginning of the film didn't cease to exist just because you're now watching the middle frame. And the final frame already exists, even though you haven't reached it yet. The entire film is there, complete, unchanging. What changes is only which frame is being projected, which frame your consciousness is illuminating at this moment. We are the projector light passing through the eternal film. The dinosaurs didn't disappear. They exist at space-time coordinates different from ours, the same way New York exists at spatial coordinates different from where you are now. You wouldn't say New York ceased to exist just because you're not there. Why then do we say the past ceased to exist? Because our consciousness only illuminates one frame at a time. That's the limitation, not the nature of reality. This stayed with me for days when I fully understood it. Physics isn't describing a metaphor. It's describing the literal structure of the universe as revealed by the equations. And that structure is exactly what the Upanishads called the nature of Brahman, simultaneous existence of everything outside the temporal flow we experience. What the sages accessed in expanded states, Einstein formalized in mathematics. Two completely different paths, the same discovery. This raises an inevitable question. If the entire universe already exists as an eternal block, what's the role of our consciousness? Are we mere passive observers of a predetermined film? Is the experience of choice completely illusory? Not exactly. Here's where contemplative traditions offer something that physics alone doesn't explain. The Vedic masters teach that Brahman isn't just static reality, it's also the consciousness that experiences it. The observer and the observed are aspects of the same unity. When you experience the present moment, you're not just looking at a frozen frame. You're participating in the manifestation of that frame. You're giving it reality through the act of experiencing. The difference is subtle, but it transforms everything. A film projected in an empty room isn't experienced. The light needs to find a screen, needs to find eyes that see, needs to find a consciousness that transforms patterns of light into meaning, emotion, and understanding. Without consciousness, the block universe would be a perfect mathematical structure, but with no one to know it. We're not just in time. We are the process through which time becomes real. Contemplatives experience this directly. The dissolution of the boundary between observer and observed, the perception that consciousness isn't separate from what it observes. And quantum physics, as we'll see, points in a similar direction. The observer isn't neutral, but participates in the manifestation of observed reality. For now, hold this image. You're not floating in a river called time. You are the consciousness illuminating a specific slice of an eternal universe. And in that act of illumination, something happens. Something that neither physics nor mysticism alone fully explains. But together, they begin to reveal. Shamans from Amazonian traditions, yogis from India, Tibetan monks, all report something similar when they enter deep states of consciousness. Time stops. It's not a poetic metaphor. It's a literal description of the experience. The habitual flow of past, present, future simply ceases. What remains is an expanded presence where everything seems to happen simultaneously. Classical yoga texts call this state Samadhi. In Samadhi, the distinction between the meditator and what is meditated upon disappears. Along with that dissolution goes the sensation of time passing. Advanced practitioners describe sessions that seem to last minutes but consumed hours on the clock. Others report the opposite, subjective hours compressed into a few objective minutes. Internal time and external time completely disconnect. And here's what struck me when I discovered this. The physics of relativity describes exactly the same phenomenon, just with different words. Einstein demonstrated that time and space are interlinked in a way that few truly comprehend. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. It's not an illusion. It's not subjective perception. It's the literal structure of the universe. Consider a photon, a particle of light. A photon travels at the speed of light. That's the maximum possible speed in the universe. And here's the strange part. From the photon's perspective, time doesn't exist. Zero, nothing. For light, the entire universe is frozen in a single eternal instant. The photon doesn't travel from a distant star to your eyes over millions of years. For it, emission and arrival happen at the same moment. The photon experiences what yogis call Samadhi. Stop and absorb this. Physics isn't saying that time seems to stop for light. It's saying that time literally doesn't pass for anything traveling at maximum speed. And we, because we move so slowly in comparison, experience the illusion of a flowing time. This opens a possibility that shouldn't be ignored. What if altered states of consciousness aren't just subjective experiences? What if they represent a real change in how consciousness moves through space-time? The yogis aren't imagining that time stopped. They may be accessing a mode of consciousness that operates at different speeds, speeds where the passage of time behaves differently. We normally operate within a narrow band of temporal experience. Thoughts follow thoughts. Events follow events. Cause precedes effect. But that's not the only possible form of consciousness. It's just the form we're accustomed to, the form our biology and culture continuously reinforce. Contemplative traditions worldwide develop techniques to exit this narrow band. Controlled breathing, repetitive mantras, sensory deprivation, power plants. All these practices, through different paths, produce similar reports. Dissolution of temporal linearity, access to information that shouldn't be available, perception of events distant in space or time. Synchronicities, those coincidences too meaningful to be chance, gain a new framing from this perspective. If consciousness can, under certain conditions, access different slices of the block universe we saw in the previous chapter, then knowing something before it happens isn't paranormal. It's simply operating at a different speed through the space-time continuum. Prophetic visions, premonitions, telepathic perceptions, all of this stops being supernatural and becomes a matter of physics, a physics of consciousness that we're just beginning to map. I spent weeks thinking about this. What does speed mean when applied to consciousness? We're not talking about physical movement, we're talking about something more subtle, perhaps the rate at which consciousness processes information, or the amplitude of now it can encompass at once. Experienced meditators expand this now. Instead of a narrow point illuminating a single frame of the eternal film, consciousness becomes a wider light, illuminating multiple frames simultaneously. The past and future stop being abstract concepts and become accessible dimensions, not places to travel to, but perspectives to look toward. This doesn't contradict physics. This is exactly what physics predicts for consciousnesses operating in different regimes of movement through space-time. The question that remains, if this is possible, why isn't it our normal experience? Why are we trapped in this narrow, sequential perception of time? The answer may lie in something even more fundamental, something physics calls entropy and ancient traditions called conscious evolution. Medieval alchemical texts describe a phase that every initiate feared, the nigredo. The prima materia dissolved, lost color, form, identity. The vessel seemed to contain only black mud, without structure, without promise. Apprentices abandoned the work at this point, certain they had destroyed everything. The masters continued. They knew that gold only emerges from what has been completely dissolved. There's no shortcut. Destruction is part of the process. Shiva dances on the ruins of the universe. Kali wears a necklace of skulls. The phoenix burns to ashes. Orpheus descends to the underworld. Jonah spends 3 days in the whale's belly. The shaman is torn apart in vision before returning as a healer. Traditions separated by continents and millennia describe the same pattern: dissolution before transformation, death before rebirth, chaos before new order. Why does this structure appear everywhere? Modern physics offers an explanation. Entropy, the measure of informational complexity in a system, is the only reason before and after exist. Without increasing entropy, the universe would be static. There would be no memory, no sequence, no experience of duration. Time as you know it simply wouldn't exist. The fundamental equations work in both temporal directions. A collision of billiard balls looks natural whether you run the film forward or backward. Nothing in basic mathematics determines that time should have a preferred direction. The laws are symmetric. Nothing says the future is that way. Why then does a broken egg never become whole again? Why does coffee cool but never spontaneously heat up? Why do we age in only one direction? The answer lies in probabilities. A whole egg represents an extremely specific molecular configuration. Broken, it admits millions of possible arrangements. The chance of spontaneous reorganization to the original configuration is so small that it never happens, not even in billions of years. The universe simply doesn't have enough time for that coincidence to occur. What we call disorder is an increase in possibilities. The broken egg contains more information than the whole one, more relationships between parts, more internal structure, more richness. The universe doesn't decay toward chaos. It evolves toward states of greater informational complexity. Consciousness is precisely that, enough complexity to experience itself. This connection occupied me for weeks. We instinctively resist entropy. We see in it aging, loss, and ending. We want order, control, permanence. But the very emergence of beings capable of wanting anything depended on increasing complexity. Without growing entropy, structures sophisticated enough to sustain conscious experience would never have existed. The force we fear is the same one that created us. The Big Bang marks the point of lowest entropy, almost perfect order, and completely sterile. No stars, no molecules, no differentiation, a uniform broth of energy without form, without structure, without possibility of experience, total symmetry. And for that very reason, void of consciousness, nothing to know, nothing to be known. From there, entropy grew. Galaxies condensed from hydrogen clouds. Stars were born, shone for billions of years, exploded, forging carbon, oxygen, and iron. Planets formed from dust disks. Oceans emerged. Chemistry became biology. Biology became consciousness. You are now processing these words. The universe sits complex enough to know itself. The arrow of time doesn't point toward death. It points toward us. Spiritual traditions replicate the process on an individual scale. Meditation dissolves crystallized mental patterns. Shamanic ceremonies provoke temporary ego collapse. Intensive retreats break thought habits. Fasts suspend ordinary functioning. The practitioner passes through internal chaos, personal nigredo, and emerges different, more integrated, more conscious, a structure that didn't exist before. The alchemists were right. Dissolution precedes creation. Chaos is a passage, not a destination. And the sensation of time passing is the universe progressively becoming more capable of self-knowledge. Not entropy as decay, but entropy as evolution. Every moment of consciousness you experience represents a peak of cosmic complexity. Every perception, every thought, entropy fulfilling its function, creating conditions for more consciousness to exist. You're not a victim of time. You are its most refined expression. Time doesn't happen to you. It happens through you. You're not being dragged by an external current. You are the movement itself. The universe is experiencing itself from a specific point of view, yours. The arrow of time and the evolution of consciousness are faces of the same process. One question remains: if we're expressions of a single universe knowing itself, why the sensation of separation? Why does it seem like there's an isolated I observing an external world? Why does the division between subject and object seem so solid, so inevitable? Advaita Vedanta and relativistic physics converge on an answer. Tat Tvam Asi, you are that. 3 words in Sanskrit that summarize millennia of contemplative investigation. The Upanishads, sacred texts of Vedanta compiled over 3,000 years ago, teach that the division between you and the universe is an illusion, not metaphor, not poetic exaggeration, a literal description of the nature of reality. Adi Shankara, the philosopher who systematized Advaita Vedanta in the 8th century, called this division Maya. The mind creates boundaries where none exist, separates subject from object, observer from observed, self from world. But these boundaries are constructions, useful for survival, useless for understanding. Meditation masters from different traditions report the same experience when the mind quiets completely. The boundary between what observes and what is observed dissolves. There's no longer me looking at this. There's only consciousness, without internal division. Zen calls it Kensho. Sufism calls it Fana. Yoga calls it Samadhi. Different names for the same discovery. This occupied me for months. If so many traditions, developed independently, arrived at the same conclusion through direct experience, that separation is illusory, maybe they weren't making it up. Maybe they were discovering something about the structure of reality that we, in ordinary consciousness mode, simply don't perceive. Relativistic physics points in the same direction. Einstein demonstrated that there's no universal now. 2 events that seem simultaneous to you, 2 lights flashing at the same time, happen in sequence for an observer in motion. For them, the left light flashes first. For another observer, moving in the opposite direction, the right light flashes first. Which one is correct? All of them. Simultaneity depends on the observer. There's no objective now that divides the universe into past and future for everyone equally. Temporal division is perspective, not absolute reality. A construction of viewpoint, not a property of the cosmos. And if temporal division is a mental construction, what about spatial division? What about the boundary between here and there, between me and other? Advaita Vedanta answers, same nature, construction of the limited mind, useful convention, not the ultimate truth. Think of a wave in the ocean. The wave appears separate. It has a distinct form, its own movement, apparent identity. But it never stops being water. It's never really separate from the ocean. The separation is perspective. Unity is a fact. We are waves in an ocean of consciousness. The sensation of being an isolated self, observing an external world, is like the wave thinking it exists independently of the water. Useful for navigating, false as a description of reality. This clarifies phenomena that seem inexplicable in the model of separate consciousnesses, telepathic perceptions, remote viewing, synchronicities. If consciousness is fundamentally one, if we are localized expressions of a single field, then information accessed at a distance isn't really distant. It's here. It always was. Distance is the illusion. Physicist David Bohm proposed something similar. He called it the implicate order, a level of reality where everything is interconnected, folded together. What we see as separation is the explicate order, the unfolding of that unity into apparently distinct forms. Separation isn't a lie, it's a partial perspective. It's looking at a slice of the whole and confusing it with the whole. This changes how you understand your own existence. You're not connected to the universe. Connection implies two separate things that link up. The truth is more radical. You are the universe experiencing itself through a particular point of view. There's no connection because there was never a separation. Separation is the dream. Awakening is recognizing what always was. The sensation of separation is functional. It allows operating in the world, making decisions, protecting the body, interacting with other apparent selves. But confusing it with the ultimate truth is the error that contemplative traditions spent millennia trying to correct. Tat tvam asi. You are that, not you are connected to that, not you come from that. You are. Identity, not relationship. The Upanishads weren't being poetic, they were being precise, and physics, through completely different paths, mathematical equations, controlled experiments, rigorous observations, arrived at conclusions that echo that precision. Relative simultaneity, quantum entanglement, non-locality. The structure of the universe doesn't support absolute separation. We insist on the illusion because it's comfortable, because the ego depends on it, because all our language presupposes subject and object self, and other, here and there. But insisting doesn't make it true. The question that remains is simple. If you're not separate from the universe, if you are the universe experiencing itself locally, what's the role of time? What does it mean to be born, live, and die when there's no separate you for these things to happen to? The answer closes the circle and transforms everything. The question that haunts philosophers and physicists: what existed before the beginning? In 1981, Stephen Hawking and James Hartle proposed something radical. In what they called the no-boundary proposal, they demonstrated that asking what was there before the Big Bang contains a category error. Time, at the subatomic scales of the beginning, didn't exist as a separate dimension. It was fused with space into a single closed surface, like the surface of a sphere. On a sphere, you can walk in any direction, but there's no outside of the surface, not because there's a wall, because the category outside simply doesn't apply. The surface is all that exists. There's nothing beyond it to go to or come from. The beginning of the universe is like that. It's not the first moment in time, it's where the very possibility of moments arises. Asking what came before is like asking what's south of the South Pole. The question assumes a dimension that doesn't exist at that point. This destroys the narrative we've carried since childhood. We imagine time as a line, past on the left, future on the right. Us, a tiny point dragging from left to right without choice, without power, at the mercy of the flow. We're born, we age, we die, passive victims of something that happens to us. But if time doesn't flow, if past, present, and future coexist in a geometric structure, then that narrative is wrong. And if that narrative has been wrong all along, what else is wrong about how we understand our existence? Let's return to what we've covered together. The Upanishads teach that Brahman exists outside of time. Physics confirms the block universe is timeless. Meditation masters report dissolution of temporal sequence in deep states. Relativity explains movement through time depends on velocity. For light, time doesn't pass. Entropy creates the directional arrow we perceive. The non-duality of Vedanta reveals observer and observed are one thing. All these discoveries, coming from contemplative traditions and physics laboratories, converge on a single point. You're not in time, you are time, not in the poetic sense, in the structural, literal sense. Without consciousness to experience, there's no past being remembered, present being perceived, future being anticipated. There's only a frozen mathematical structure, pure potential without realization, film without a projector, music without ears. It's consciousness that transforms geometry into lived experience. This inverts the hierarchy we learned. Materialism teaches that consciousness is a byproduct, neurons firing, brain chemistry, an irrelevant epiphenomenon in a reality that would exist perfectly fine without observers. But if observation participates in manifestation, if potential only collapses into reality through consciousness, then everything inverts. The question changes. It's not, how did matter produce consciousness? It's, how does consciousness manifest what we call matter? Amit Goswami, theoretical physicist, argues exactly this in The Self-Aware Universe. Consciousness doesn't emerge from the material emerges from consciousness. The universe isn't a machine that accidentally generated observers. It's a process of self-knowledge where observers are the purpose. You are the universe knowing itself through a specific point of view. Every question you ask is the cosmos asking about itself. Every moment of consciousness you experience is eternity manifesting temporally. You're not separate from the whole, trying to understand it from the outside. You are the whole understanding itself from within. What changes when you live from this? Not just understand it intellectually. Understanding is a map. Direct experience is territory. Knowing the ocean exists is different from diving into it. You can study the chemical composition of water, the physics of waves, marine biology, and still never have felt the salt on your lips, the pressure of depth, the movement of currents. Contemplative traditions develop precise practices for crossing that distance, techniques that induce states where the illusion of separation temporarily dissolves, and what remains is direct recognition. Not belief, not theory, experience. Specific sound frequencies facilitate this transition. Audio patterns that synchronize brain activity and create conditions for the mind to exit its habitual fragmented channels. Not theory. Technology applied to consciousness. The same principle Feynman discovered about the channels of the mind was only used intentionally. We've developed a set of these tools. If what you heard in this video resonates, if the possibility that you're not a victim of time, but its very expression, makes sense on some level that words don't reach, maybe it's time to experience it directly. To learn more and get immediate access, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "It made sense to me."